I never thought I'd have to arrest a 12-year-old boy for theft, especially not in my own backyard. But as I watched Karen Morrison's son Tyler sneaking through my kitchen window at 2 in the morning, stuffing my refrigerator contents into garbage bags, I realized that some lessons can only be learned the hard way. My name is Detective Sarah Chen, and for the past 15 years, I've been the chief of police for Meadowbrook Ranch, a quiet, gated community nestled in the rolling hills outside Denver. I thought I'd seen it all in my career: domestic disputes, petty theft, the occasional drug bust. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the war that Karen Morrison would wage against my family over a children's birthday party. This is the story of how one woman's entitlement nearly destroyed my faith in my own community, and how justice sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. By the time this was over, I would question everything I thought I knew about the people I'd sworn to protect and serve. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, 3 weeks before that fateful night when I found Tyler Morrison ransacking my kitchen like a common burglar. Meadowbrook Ranch isn't just where I work. It's where I've lived for the past 8 years with my husband Marcus and our twin daughters, Emma and Sophie. At 10 years old, the girls were the light of our lives, and after years of working double shifts and missing bedtime stories, I'd finally found a balance between my duty to the community and my devotion to my family. Our house sits at the end of Willow Creek Drive, a modest 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch that Marcus built with his own hands. The backyard opens up to a small creek that runs through the property, and on quiet evenings, you can hear the water babbling over smooth stones while the girls chase fireflies in the fading light. It was a Tuesday in early September when Karen Morrison first knocked on my door. I remember it clearly because I'd just gotten home from a particularly difficult day. We'd had a break-in at the community center, and I'd spent hours dusting for prints and interviewing witnesses. Karen stood on my porch with that particular smile that immediately put me on edge. You know, the one too wide, too bright, with eyes that don't quite match the enthusiasm. She was perfectly put together, as always, in her designer athleisure wear and freshly highlighted hair. Everything about Karen Morrison screamed money and control. "Sarah," she chirped, as if we were old friends instead of neighbors who barely exchanged pleasantries at the mailbox. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." I glanced down at my uniform, still wrinkled from the long day, and tried to muster some politeness. "Not at all, Karen. What can I do for you?" "Well, as you know, Tyler's birthday is coming up next month," she began, stepping closer to my door without invitation. "He's turning 13. Can you believe it? Where does the time go?" I nodded politely, wondering where this conversation was headed. Tyler Morrison was Karen's only child, a quiet kid who seemed to live in his mother's shadow. I'd seen him around the neighborhood, always impeccably dressed, always walking 2 steps behind Karen with his head down. "Anyway," Karen continued, "I'm planning something really special for him. A party that the whole community will remember. And I was hoping you might be able to help me with a little favor." The word favor coming from Karen Morrison made my stomach clench. In my experience, people like Karen don't ask for favors, they make demands dressed up as requests. "What kind of favor?" I asked carefully. Karen's smile grew even wider, if that was possible. "Well, you know how the community center has that beautiful commercial kitchen? I was thinking it would be perfect for catering Tyler's party. Professional-grade equipment, plenty of space. It would really make the event special." I blinked, trying to process what she was asking. "Karen, the community center kitchen is for community events and fundraisers. It's not available for private parties." Her smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Oh, but surely there's some flexibility there. I mean, given your position in the community, I thought you might be able to pull some strings." There it was, the assumption that my badge came with special privileges for the wealthy residents of Meadowbrook Ranch. I'd dealt with this attitude before, but it never got easier to swallow. I'm sorry, Karen, but the rules apply to everyone equally. The kitchen is reserved for community functions only. The change in her demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. The brightness in her eyes dimmed, and her perfect posture stiffened. I see. Well, I suppose I'll have to find another way to make Tyler's party memorable. As she turned to leave, she paused on the top step of my porch. You know, Sarah, I've always admired how seriously you take your job. I hope the community appreciates having someone so dedicated to protocol. The way she said educated made it sound like an insult. I watched her walk back to her McMansion across the street, her designer sneakers clicking against the pavement with military precision. Marcus found me still standing in the doorway 20 minutes later, staring at Karen's house with an uneasy feeling in my gut. Everything okay? He asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I'm not sure, I admitted. I think I just made an enemy. Marcus laughed, but it was strained. He'd lived in Meadowbrook Ranch longer than I had, and he knew Karen's reputation. What did she want? I told him about the conversation, about the way she'd looked at me when I refused her request. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his arms tightening around me. Maybe you should keep an eye on the girls for the next few weeks, he said finally. Karen Morrison doesn't forget when she thinks someone has wronged her. Looking back now, I wish I'd taken his warning more seriously. But at the time, I thought I understood the extent of Karen's vindictiveness. I thought I knew what I was dealing with. I had no idea that Karen Morrison was about to turn my life into a nightmare, starting with my own daughters. The first sign of trouble came exactly 1 week after my conversation with Karen. I was getting ready for work on a Wednesday morning when Emma came running into the kitchen, tears streaming down her face. Mom, they're saying I can't come to Tyler's party, she sobbed, throwing herself into my arms. I looked over at Sophie, who was picking at her breakfast with unusual quiet. What party, sweetheart? Tyler's birthday party, Emma hiccuped. Everyone in my class is invited. Everyone, except me and Sophie. My blood ran cold. Tyler was in 5th grade with my daughters, and in a community as small as Meadowbrook Ranch, excluding just 2 children from a class party was deliberate and cruel. Did Tyler tell you this directly? I asked, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. Sophie finally looked up from her cereal. No, his mom did. She came to school yesterday and handed out invitations to everyone. When she got to us, she just skipped over us. The image of Karen Morrison, standing in my daughter's classroom, deliberately excluding them while their classmates watched, made my hands shake with rage. But I forced myself to stay calm. Emma and Sophie were upset enough without seeing their mother lose control. I'm sure it was just an oversight, I lied, smoothing Emma's hair. Maybe there's been a mistake. But even as I said the words, I knew it was no mistake. Karen Morrison was sending me a message, cross her, and your family pays the price. That afternoon, I called the elementary school. Mrs. Patterson, the 5th grade teacher, was clearly uncomfortable when I brought up the party invitations. Mrs. Chen, I did notice that Emma and Sophie weren't invited. It seemed odd to me too, especially since Mrs. Morrison made such a show of handing out the invitations during class time. During class time? I repeated. Is that normal? Mrs. Patterson sighed. Not really, no. Usually, parents handle party invitations outside of school. But Mrs. Morrison insisted it was important to do it during the school day, so all the children could see how excited Tyler was about his party. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Karen hadn't just excluded my daughters, she'd made sure their exclusion was as public and humiliating as possible. Is there anything the school can do? I asked. I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen. Private party invitations aren't really something we can regulate. I know it's not fair to the girls, but I understood. The school couldn't force Karen to invite my daughters to her son's party. But that didn't make it any easier to watch Emma and Sophie try to pretend they weren't hurt when their classmates spent recess talking about Tyler's upcoming celebration. For the next week, I told myself that this was the extent of Karen's revenge. A petty slight that would blow over once Tyler's party was finished and forgotten. I tried to focus on planning something special for my own daughters. That weekend, maybe a trip to the zoo or a movie day with all their favorite snacks. But Karen Morrison wasn't finished with us. Not even close. The second attack came through the Meadowbrook Ranch HOA newsletter. Every month, the Homeowners Association published a glossy little magazine highlighting community news, upcoming events, and unfortunately, a gossip column called Neighborhood Watch that was supposed to focus on security concerns, but often devolved into thinly veiled complaints about residents. I was drinking my morning coffee and flipping through the October issue when I saw it. There, under the Neighborhood Watch heading, was a paragraph that made my blood run cold. Several residents have expressed concerns about the professional conduct of certain community employees who may be using their positions to bend rules for personal gain. While we appreciate the service of all our staff, it's important to remember that everyone must follow the same standards, regardless of their job title. The HOA board reminds all residents that any concerns about staff conduct should be reported immediately so we can maintain the integrity of our community. It was masterfully crafted, vague enough to avoid a libel lawsuit, but specific enough that anyone who knew about my conversation with Karen would understand exactly who they were talking about. The implication was clear. I was corrupt, using my position as police chief for personal benefit. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Marcus read the paragraph over my shoulder and cursed under his breath. "She can't do this," he said. "This is defamation. You could sue her for this." But even as he said it, we both knew the reality. Karen had been careful with her wording. She hadn't mentioned my name or made any specific accusations. A lawsuit would be expensive, time-consuming, and ultimately ineffective against such carefully crafted innuendo. The worst part was that it worked. Over the next few days, I noticed the change in how some residents interacted with me. The warm greetings became cooler. The friendly waves turned into polite nods. Mrs. Henderson, who usually stopped to chat when I patrolled her street, suddenly found urgent reasons to go back inside when she saw me coming. It was Dr. Martinez, one of the few HOA board members I trusted, who finally told me what was happening behind the scenes. "Karen's been making the rounds," he said quietly when he stopped by my office at the community center. "Telling people you tried to pressure her into giving you access to the community kitchen for your own personal use." I stared at him in disbelief. "That's completely backwards." "She asked me to let her use the kitchen for her son's party." "I know," Dr. Martinez said sadly. "But Karen's version sounds more believable to people who don't know you well. She's saying you wanted to cater a party for your daughters and got angry when she wouldn't go along with it." The twisted brilliance of Karen's lie was breathtaking. She'd taken the exact conversation we'd had and flipped it completely, casting herself as the victim of my supposed abuse of power. And because she was the one spreading the story, she got to control the narrative. "What can I do?" I asked, feeling helpless for the first time in my career. Dr. Martinez shook his head. "For now, nothing. Making a big deal out of it will only draw more attention to the rumors. Karen's hoping you'll overreact and give her more ammunition." That night, as I tucked Emma and Sophie into bed, I tried to push down the growing dread in my stomach. Karen had attacked my professional reputation and isolated my children socially. But surely she wouldn't escalate things further. I was wrong. So terribly, dangerously wrong. The next morning, I woke up to find my flower garden, the one I'd spent 3 years carefully cultivating, with Marcus, completely destroyed. Every plant had been ripped out of the ground, the soil scattered across our driveway. In the center of the devastation, someone had left a note written in block letters: MAYBENOW YULLAARNSOM As I stood there in my pajamas, looking at the destruction of something I'd poured my heart into, I realized that Karen Morrison wasn't just vindictive. She was escalating things in a way that felt dangerous and unpredictable. But this was only the beginning of what she had planned for my family. The garden destruction was the wake-up call I needed. This wasn't just about Karen's hurt feelings or petty revenge anymore. This was harassment, and it was time I started treating it like the crime it was. I documented everything: the destroyed garden, the threatening note, even took pictures of the scattered soil and uprooted plants. Then I started asking questions around the neighborhood, using the investigative skills that had made me a good police officer. Mrs. Yang, who lived 2 houses down from Karen, was the first person willing to talk to me honestly. She'd always been kind to my family, and her grandson played with Emma and Sophie sometimes. "I saw Karen's car leaving your street very early that morning," she told me quietly, glancing around as if Karen might be listening. "Around 5 a.m. It was strange because she's usually not up that early. Did you see anything else unusual?" I pressed. Mrs. Yang hesitated, then nodded. "The night before, I saw Tyler in your front yard. He was just standing there, looking at your house. When I waved at him, he ran away very quickly." The pieces were starting to come together, but I needed more evidence. That's when I remembered the community center's security system. As police chief, I had access to all the surveillance footage in Meadowbrook Ranch, including the cameras that monitored the main streets. I spent my lunch break reviewing footage from the past 2 weeks, looking for any sign of Karen or Tyler near my property. What I found was more disturbing than I'd expected. There was Karen's BMW driving slowly past my house multiple times over the past week, always in the early morning or late evening when most residents wouldn't be awake to see her. On 3 separate occasions, I could see her parked across from my house, just sitting in her car and watching. But it was the footage from Tyler's birthday party weekend that really opened my eyes to what Karen was planning. The community center cameras showed Karen making multiple trips to the building on Saturday afternoon, carrying large boxes and coolers. This wasn't unusual. Many residents used the community center for events. But something about her furtive movements and the way she kept looking around made me suspicious. I decided to check the community center's kitchen more thoroughly. As police chief, I had master keys to all the common areas, and what I found there made my blood run cold. Hidden in the walk-in pantry were dozens of containers of food, expensive catered items, gourmet desserts, cases of imported drinks. Enough food to feed 100 people or more. And tucked behind the containers was a catering invoice made out to Tyler Morrison's birthday party, with a total cost that made my eyes water. Karen had been planning to use the community kitchen all along, despite my refusal to give her permission. She'd simply decided to take what she wanted and deal with the consequences later. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. Taped to the inside of one of the pantry shelves was a handwritten note in Karen's distinctive script: Phase 2, get them to move away. I photographed everything, my hands shaking as the implications sank in. The destroyed garden, the social isolation of my daughters, the rumors about my professional conduct. They weren't random acts of revenge. They were part of a calculated campaign to drive my family out of Meadowbrook Ranch. As I stood there in the community center kitchen, surrounded by evidence of Karen's elaborate deception, I realized that I'd been thinking too small. This wasn't just about a birthday party or hurt feelings. Karen Morrison was waging a psychological war against my family, and she was playing by rules I'd never encountered before. But Karen had made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated who she was dealing with. I'd spent 15 years as a police officer, and I'd learned that the most dangerous criminals are often the ones who think they're too smart to get caught. Karen's arrogance had led her to document her own crimes, and now I had the evidence I needed to fight back. That evening, I called Dr. Martinez and asked him to meet me at the community center. When he saw the hidden food and the incriminating note, his face went white. "My God, Sarah. She's been planning this for weeks." "Months, probably," I corrected. "This level of organization doesn't happen overnight." Dr. Martinez ran his hands through his hair. "What do you want to do?" I looked at the catering invoice again, noting the date and the authorization signature, a forged version of my own name. "I want to call an emergency HOA board meeting. It's time everyone knew exactly who Karen Morrison really is." But even as I said the words, I knew that Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. She'd already shown that she was willing to target my children to get to me. If I cornered her publicly, there was no telling how far she might escalate things. I just never imagined that she would involve Tyler in the final phase of her plan, or that I would find him in my kitchen in the middle of the night, stealing food for a party that had already happened. The emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening in the community center's main hall. Word spread quickly through Meadowbrook Ranch, and by 7 p.m., nearly every resident was packed into the room, buzzing with curiosity and tension. I sat in the front row with Marcus and the girls, my evidence folder thick with photographs, security footage, and documentation. Karen sat across the aisle with Tyler beside her, looking for all the world like the picture of innocent motherhood. Dr. Martinez called the meeting to order and explained that there were serious accusations of misconduct that needed to be addressed. As he spoke, I watched Karen's face, looking for any sign of nervousness or guilt. Instead, I saw confidence. She thought she had already won. "Before we hear from Mrs. Chen," Dr. Martinez announced, "I want everyone to remember that these are serious accusations. We're here to get to the truth, not to engage in personal attacks." I stood up, my legs surprisingly steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was my chance to expose Karen's campaign of harassment and reclaim my family's place in the community. I started with a destroyed garden, showing photographs of the damage and the threatening note. Then I moved on to the security footage, projecting it onto the wall so everyone could see Karen's BMW making repeated passes by my house. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as the evidence mounted. I could see doubt creeping into the faces of residents who had believed Karen's rumors about me. But it was when I revealed the hidden food in the community center kitchen that the room erupted. Mrs. Morrison used forged authorization to store catered food in our community kitchen, I announced, holding up the invoice with my forged signature. Food that was intended for her son's birthday party, despite being explicitly told that private parties were not allowed to use community facilities. Karen stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. Sarah Chen is making wild accusations because she's embarrassed about being caught abusing her position? Then how do you explain this?" I asked, projecting the photograph of her handwritten note onto the wall. Phase 2, get them to move away. The room went silent. Even Karen's most ardent supporters couldn't explain away her own handwriting plotting against my family. But Karen Morrison hadn't survived in her social circle by backing down from fights. If anything, being cornered made her more dangerous. "That note could have been written by anyone," she said, her voice carrying that same saccharine tone I'd first heard on my porch. "Sarah has access to the entire community center. She could have planted that evidence herself." It was a desperate gambit, but I could see it working on some residents. The seed of doubt was there. After all, I did have access to plant evidence if I'd wanted to frame Karen. That's when Tyler Morrison did something that shocked everyone in the room. He stood up beside his mother and said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Mom, stop lying." Karen went rigid. "Tyler, sit down. This isn't the time for it." "You made me help you," Tyler continued, his voice growing stronger. "You made me watch Mrs. Chen's house and tell you when her family left. You made me help you carry all that food into the community center kitchen." The room was dead silent now. Every eye was on this 13-year-old boy who was dismantling his mother's lies with simple, devastating honesty. "Tyler Morrison, you sit down this instant," Karen hissed, but her son shook his head. "I'm tired of it, Mom. I'm tired of you being mean to people. Mrs. Chen didn't do anything wrong. You just got mad because she wouldn't break the rules for us." Tears were streaming down Tyler's face now, and I felt my heart break for him. This boy had been carrying the weight of his mother's vendetta for weeks, and the guilt was finally too much for him to bear. "You destroyed her garden," Tyler said, looking directly at me. "I helped you, and I'm sorry. You made me promise not to tell anyone, but it's not right." Karen grabbed Tyler's arm, trying to pull him back to his seat, but he pulled away from her. "And tonight," Tyler continued, his voice cracking with emotion, "she was going to make me go to their house and take all their food. She said we needed it for another party, but I know that's not true. She just wants to hurt them more." The room erupted in shocked voices and angry murmurs. I stared at Tyler in confusion. "Tonight? What do you mean?" Tyler looked at his mother, then back at me. "Mom said we were going to your house after this meeting. She has a key to your back door. She was going to make me go inside and take everything from your refrigerator and pantry while you were here." My blood ran cold. While we were all sitting in this meeting, Karen had planned to send her own son to burglarize my home. The level of premeditation and cruelty was breathtaking. But Karen Morrison had one last card to play. "None of this is true," she screamed, her careful composure finally cracking. "Tyler is confused. He's been under a lot of stress with all these false accusations against me." She turned to address the room, her voice rising to a desperate pitch. "Sarah Chen has been harassing my family for weeks. She's been following us, taking pictures of us, trying to intimidate us because we wouldn't help her break the rules. It was a masterful performance, I had to admit." Even in the face of overwhelming evidence, Karen was trying to flip the script one more time. And looking around the room, I could see that some residents were still unsure who to believe. That's when Dr. Martinez stood up with something in his hand, a cell phone. "I'm sorry, Karen," he said quietly, "but I've been recording this entire meeting, including the part where Tyler confessed to helping you commit crimes against the Chen family." Karen's face went white as the implication sank in. Not only had her son's testimony destroyed her credibility, but it was all on record now. But the final blow came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who had been avoiding me since Karen's rumors started spreading. "I saw you," Mrs. Henderson said, standing up slowly. "2 nights ago, I saw you trying Dr. Handles on the Chen house. I thought about calling Sarah, but I was afraid. I was afraid of what you might do to me." The admission hung in the air like a physical weight. Karen Morrison, the woman who had positioned herself as the moral authority of Meadowbrook Ranch, had been caught attempting to break into a police officer's home. As I looked around the room, at the faces of my neighbors' faces that had been turned against me by Karen's lies, I saw understanding dawn. They were finally seeing Karen Morrison for who she really was. But victory felt hollow as I watched Tyler Morrison sobbing quietly beside his mother. This boy had been manipulated and used as a weapon against my family, and now he was paying the price for his mother's cruelty. Whatever happened next, I knew that the real victims in this entire affair were the children Tyler, Emma, and Sophie, who had been caught in the crossfire of an adult's vindictive war. In the end, justice came swiftly for Karen Morrison. The evidence against her was overwhelming: breaking and entering, vandalism, theft of community property, and attempted burglary. The district attorney's office filed multiple charges, and Karen found herself facing the very legal system she had tried to manipulate. But the real resolution came in smaller, more personal moments. The first was Tyler himself. After the meeting, as Karen was led away by my colleagues from the county sheriff's department, I had recused myself from the investigation for obvious reasons. Tyler approached me with his father. "Mrs. Chen," he said, his voice still shaky from crying, "I'm really, really sorry. I didn't want to help her hurt you and your family. I was scared of what she'd do if I said no." Looking into this boy's eyes, I saw the same fear I'd been living with for weeks, the fear of Karen Morrison's unpredictable wrath. The difference was that Tyler had been living with it his entire life. "You did the right thing tonight," I told him. It took a lot of courage to tell the truth, especially when it was hard. Tyler's father, David, put his hand on his son's shoulder. "We're going to get Tyler some counseling," he said quietly. I had no idea how bad things had gotten with Karen. I travel for work, and I guess I didn't see what was happening at home. Over the next few weeks, as the legal proceedings against Karen moved forward, the community of Meadowbrook Ranch began to heal. Neighbors who had believed Karen's lies came forward with apologies. Mrs. Henderson baked cookies for Emma and Sophie. Dr. Martinez organized a community garden day to help replant my destroyed flower beds. The girls' social lives returned to normal quickly. Children are remarkably resilient, and once Tyler started inviting them to play again, the other kids followed suit. Emma and Sophie never asked why they hadn't been invited to Tyler's original party. Some wounds heal better when left unexamined. Karen was ultimately sentenced to community service, probation, and restitution for the property damage. More importantly, she lost custody of Tyler, who went to live with his father full-time. David moved them to a different school district, giving Tyler a chance to start fresh without his mother's influence. The last time I saw Karen Morrison was at her sentencing hearing. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without her designer clothes and perfect makeup. As she was led out of the courtroom, she caught my eye for just a moment. I expected to see anger or hatred there, but instead, I saw something that surprised me: emptiness. Karen Morrison had built her entire identity around control and manipulation, and without those tools, she seemed lost. I didn't feel sorry for her, not after what she'd put my family through. But I felt sorry for Tyler, who had spent 13 years learning that love came with conditions and that other people were obstacles to be manipulated rather than human beings to be respected. 6 months later, Marcus and I were working in our rebuilt garden when Emma came running from the house with a cordless phone. "Mom, it's Tyler?" I took the phone, curious. Tyler and his father had moved to Colorado Springs, nearly 2 hours away, and we hadn't spoken since the legal proceedings ended. "Hi, Mrs. Chen," Tyler's voice came through clearly, stronger and more confident than I remembered. "I wanted to call and tell you that I made the honor roll this semester. My dad said I should share good news with people who matter to me." My eyes filled with tears. "That's wonderful, Tyler. I'm so proud of you." "Mrs. Chen?" Tyler's voice grew quieter. "I'm having a birthday party next month. Nothing fancy, just pizza and video games with some kids from my new school. Would Emma and Sophie like to come? I know it's far, but..." I looked out at my daughters, playing in the garden that our community had helped rebuild, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "We wouldn't miss it," I told him. As I hung up the phone, Marcus wrapped his arms around me from behind, just like he had that first day when Karen Morrison came to our door. "Everything okay?" he asked. I leaned back against his chest, watching our daughters chase fireflies in the fading light. Everything's perfect. The truth is, I learned something important from my battle with Karen Morrison. Evil isn't always obvious or dramatic. Sometimes it wears designer clothes and speaks in pleasant tones. Sometimes it hides behind concern for children or community standards. But real evil reveals itself through its fruits, division, fear, and the targeting of innocence. I also learned that good people sometimes make bad choices when they're scared, and that redemption is possible for those brave enough to tell the truth when it matters most. Tyler Morrison's courage in that community center meeting didn't just expose his mother's lies, it saved his own soul. And in doing so, he reminded me why I became a police officer in the first place, to protect the vulnerable and stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. If you've stuck with me through this long story, thank you. And if you've ever dealt with someone like Karen Morrison in your own life, remember that truth has a way of surfacing eventually. Sometimes justice takes longer than we'd like, but it does come. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever dealt with a neighborhood bully who seemed to have all the power? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of HOA drama and community justice, consider subscribing to our channel. We share stories like this every week, real tales of ordinary people standing up to extraordinary dysfunction in their neighborhoods and communities. Until next time, this is Sarah Chen reminding you that sometimes the badge chooses you, but character? That's a choice you make every single day.